pretty much without any doubt. It's impartial. It's like science. It does not require any witnesses or any things that are dependent on anything else. It's the DNA. If the DNA belongs to the person, then we know the person's the source. It's been used very often in high-profile cases because it's just so good. And when you deal with high-profile people, you don't want to make mistakes. You want to have an ironclad case. And President Clinton and his foibles in the White House, it was used in his impeachment to prove that he did what he should not have done. Never mind that. Let's go on. It's also been used to condemn, because we can find the person, they left their DNA there, and also to exonerate people. Let's say, we see that the person who left the DNA is not this criminal. There were cases of Central Park cases where there was the people there were some criminals that were brought in. Someone was attacked in Central Park in New York, in Manhattan, and they found some people, some young men, and these had, I think some of them had criminal records. They got these young men to confess. But as it turned out, the DNA proved that these people could not have done it, and eventually they found the right person. So it actually exonerated these others, even though they had, for some reason, confessed. Maybe they were compelled to do it. Whatever it is, the DNA told the truth. So it's used to exonerate as well as condemn. Also, there are many cold cases cases in the past where they just simply did not have enough information. Now that we can use the DNA, we can actually find out exactly who was there and or maybe even who wasn't. So there are many uses for DNA, and it's a very good thing to use for evidence. So because of that, we are in forensics, in forensic analysis, and trying to solve cases, we are all over the DNA. Again, a warning in case it wasn't it wasn't mentioned in this lecture. Anyway, identical twins have identical DNA, so you can't differentiate between identical twins. But other than that, you can isolate one person out of anybody else in the world, pretty much, based on using the correct DNA procedures. A bit of a warning about cold cases where I'm sure you've heard of many of the situation where when there were people were incarcerated or maybe even put to death based on what they have in their trial, and then later on use DNA evidence to exonerate them, to show that they never really should have been guilty. Now, be aware that does not mean that the original case was done wrong and the person actually is not guilty. It can sometimes show that the earlier case did not have enough clear evidence, and now that there's DNA, there's clear evidence that might point to somebody else, so that no longer is it beyond a reasonable doubt that the person was guilty. However, let's not say our justice procedures in the past were all wrong. The fact that new DNA evidence allows the person to be exonerated does not mean the person didn't do the crime. Does not mean that the jury that found them guilty were very wrong. It just means that now we have more information. Now there's more doubt. So anyway, never mind that. Let's go on. We mentioned the database that has everybody's DNA. Not everybody's, but wherever they can get a DNA sample, they put it in the CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, so that if we find some mysterious DNA at a crime scene, we check it with all the people in the CODIS, including all the criminals who've had their DNA taken and put there. So we take our unknown DNA, our crime scene DNA, try to match it up with whatever's in the CODIS. We know the name of the person in the CODIS. If it matches, then we know who was at the crime scene, and we can catch criminals that way. Again, one of the many uses of DNA. This can be it's searchable via computer, and it has been used countless times. I mean, not countless. But I think more than hundreds of thousands of times to identify or attempt to identify DNA found to a person whose DNA was in the CODIS. This is available internationally for international police work. However, all you need to be put in the CODIS are 13 STRs. We try to get all 16. But if you have 13, it can be put in the CODIS. There's also familial DNA. Now, DNA does come from the parents. It's similar to the parents, similar to close family members. It's not identical, unless they're identical twins, but they are similar. So, and this is very useful because sometimes we try to match the DNA. It does not match to anybody in the CODIS, but it is similar to one or two people in the CODIS. So we can suspect, wait, maybe it was a family member of those people who are in the CODIS. Now, not everyone gets, again, if you're a criminal and you're incarcerated, you're going to have your DNA there. So if the DNA at the crime scene is similar to one of them you found in the CODIS, then the relatives might be considered people of interest, and maybe they were the ones at the crime scene. It's useful because, for whatever reason, of those incarcerated, 46% of them have close relatives who are also involved in criminal activity. So in a way, you increase the whatever's in the CODIS, or the probability to get from the CODIS, because if there was a criminal doing crime at the crime scene, then there's a strong chance that it's related to someone who was incarcerated and whose DNA you actually find in the CODIS. So this is not generally done in the United States. In England, it actually is done all the time. But in the United States, unless you have a reason, you have a DNA sample. It does not match anyone in the CODIS, but you suspect it's done by a relative of someone who was in the CODIS. Then you might do the familial DNA checking. But without a reason, we generally don't do it in the United States. There is also mitochondrial DNA. Now, we've discussed the DNA, the main DNA, that when people say DNA, this is what they mean. They mean the DNA from the nucleus of the cell. Now, cells don't only have nuclei, they also have mitochondria. Mitochondria provide the power for the cell. And for whatever reason, the mitochondria have their own DNA. And there's a lot of mitochondria in the cell. Let's say 1,000 mitochondria in each cell, providing the power for the cell. There's one nucleus, but 1,000 mitochondria. If each mitochondria has its own DNA, then it's possible to get a lot more DNA from a cell than just from the nucleus. But the mitochondrial DNA it's different. It's circular. It's not straight chain DNA. But so it's different. It's also harder to get out of the mitochondria. Rupturing the nucleus and getting it out, we can do that easily. But one of the differences is that it's circular and it's harder to get. Hairs, even though we can't get ordinary nuclear DNA from the cells, they're usually too damaged, but you can get mitochondrial DNA from hairs. So even if there's no hair root to get nuclear DNA, you get mitochondrial DNA, because there's a lot more mitochondria with their DNA than the nucleus. So this is useful for hair evidence. There are problems, limitations. It's harder to do. It's more expensive, time-consuming. Also, it can't discriminate between a person and a maternal relative. So a mother and a daughter, or a mother and a son will have identical mitochondrial DNA. However, this in a way can be used to advantage, because if we suspect somebody, we don't have their DNA. Let's say we have a hair, let's say, or any DNA really. But let's say we have a hair evidence. We don't know who it belongs to. We strongly suspect, let's say there are witnesses to it, or we have other reason to suspect one suspect, and the person's out of town. So what we can do is get the DNA, the mitochondrial DNA evidence